Okay, we're on chapter 26 of Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey. Let's get right into it, shall we? Bulger and I had little appetite for the dainty breakfast of stewed sweetbreads which the Culticorp set before us the next morning, for I knew, and he half suspected, that something important was going to happen, but nothing less than the cleaving asunder of the crystal cell which had held the little chimpanzee a prisoner for so many centuries. Walking beside the merry Princess Schneebol, who was delighted to know that his frigid majesty, her father, had at least yielded to my wishes, Bulger and I set out for the beautiful ice grotto. Behind us walked Frodo Fitz and Glacier Boy, with instructions from the king to supervise the cleaving asunder of the block of ice. And after them came 4 of King Gelidus' quarrymen, 2 bearing flint axes with helves of polished bone, and 2 carrying flint wedges to be used in the work. We soon entered Schneebol's grotto, and the task was at once entered upon. It seemed to me that I could almost see the little man with the frozen smile wink his eyelids as the quarrymen set their wedges in place and began to mark the line of fracture. But, of course, dear friends, you know what an imagination I have, especially when I get worked up over anything. So you must take what I say sometimes with a grain of salt, although as a rule you may accept my statements with childlike confidence. With such wonderful skill did the Culticorp's quarrymen use their axes and wedges, and that in a few moments, to my great delight, the huge block of ice fell asunder in perfect halves, in one of which the little man-like creature lay on his side like a casting in a mold. I made haste to lift him out of the wrap with a soft pelt which I had brought along for that purpose, and then I turned to retrace my steps to my chamber, where I intended to begin at once my study of whatever inscriptions should be found upon his curious collar. "Remember, little Baron," said Glacier Boy, "by express command of his frigid majesty, the little man with the frozen smile must be returned to his crystal cell tomorrow morning at this very hour." I bowed assent, and then, having accompanied Princess Schneebol as far as the bottom of the grand staircase leading to the ice palace, I turned away and was soon in the privacy of my own apartment. Now came for me one of the bitterest disappointments of my life. I submitted with a good grace, for it was with fit punishment visited upon me for my foolish vanity in striving to unearth some older record of the human race than had yet been done by any great searchers and philosophers, not even expecting the master of masters, Fum, we'll call him. Know then, dear friends, that the quaint collar made up of gold and silver coins or discs cunningly linked together, which encircled the animal's neck, contained not a single word or letter of any language, the undersides being quite blank, and the upper merely having roughly carved out lines of an object which might possibly have been intended for the sun. Wrapping the animal up in a soft pelt, I laid him away in a corner of my divan, and betook myself to the palace of his frigid majesty, where I frankly informed King Gelidus of my great disappointment in not finding some few words, or even a single word, of language unknown to the wisest heads of the upper world. Schneebol was so touched by my sadness that, had I not skillfully kept it out of her way, I verily believe she would have thrown her arms around my neck and imprinted upon my cheek the kiss which would have made me the king of the Culticorps. But I had no longing to spend the rest of my life in the icy domains of his frigid majesty. Even though my brow would be crowned with the cold crown of the Culticorps, if I had been an old man with slow and feeble pulse, it would have been very different. But my heart was too warm and my blood was too hot to fill such a position with agreeableness to myself or satisfaction to the people of this icy underworld. So I kept the little princess busy enough, I can assure you, first with songs, then with dance, and then with storytelling. That night King Gelidus ordered a magnificent fete to be held in my honor. 500 more alabaster lamps were lighted, and the royal divans were laid with the richest pelts in the palace. And after the dancing and singing had ended, frozen tidbits from the royal kitchen were passed around on alabaster salvers, and Bulger and I ate until our teeth ached. It was late when we reached our own apartment, and so full were my thoughts of the beautiful sights which we had gazed upon the throne room that I had quite forgotten about the poor little man with the frozen smile, whom I had covered up and tucked away in my divan. But Bulger had not been so hard-hearted. 20 times during the evening he had given me a sly tug at my sleeve, as much to say, "Come, little master, let's hurry back. Dost not remember that we left the poor little frozen brother tucked away in an icy chamber all alone by himself?" I was very weary and fell off to sleep almost immediately, and yet I had an indistinct recollection that Bulger was not in his place against my breast. I remembered feeling for him, but that's all. It never flashed upon me that he had gone and lain down beside the poor little stranger, whom I had so unfeelingly lifted from his last resting place, and yet such must have been the case, for about midnight it seemed to me I was awakened by a gentle tugging at my sleeve. Well, we can't stop there, can we? It was my faithful Bulger. But half awake and half asleep as I was, I merely thought that he was only asking for a caress, as so often is his wont when he fell a-thinking about home. So I reached out and stroked his head several times and dropped off again. But the tugging began anew, and this time 'twas more vigorous, and with it came an impatient whine, which meant, "Come, come, little master, rouse thee. Dost suppose I would break thy rest unless thou were good reasons for it?" I didn't need a third reminder, but with a single bound landed on my feet and reached out for one of the tiny tapers which Koltykwerps makes use of as lighters. I carried the flames from the single lamp burning on the wall to the 3 others hanging here and there. The icy walls of my chamber were now ablaze with light. There sat Bulger on the fur-covered divan, beside the place where the little man with the frozen smile lay hidden under the pelt. His tail was wagging nervously, and his large, lustrous eyes were fixed upon me, and then upon a covering of his dead brother, with an expression I never remembered having seen in them before. And then, with a sudden movement, he laid open the pelt, and, drawing it aside, showed me, what think you, dear friends, what I ask in a tone of half-whisper, half-gasp, for now years after I can still feel that wonderful thrill. Which I felt then? Why, it was alive. The ape-like creature had come to life after his sleep of thousands of years in a narrow crystal cell. Bulger had lain down beside his frozen brother and warmed him back to life again. Oh, it was wonderfully wonderful to see that pair of little eyes, bead-like in brightness, look up and blink at me, and then hear that low, moaning voice, so human-like as if it whimpered with a shake and a shiver. Oh, how cold it is, how very cold it is. Where's the sun? Where's the soft, warm wind? Where are the cloudless skies so blue, and so beautifully blue that used to hang over my head? Bidding Bulger lie down again beside him and snuggle up as close as possible, I made haste to cover them both with the softest skins I could find. In a few moments there came from underneath the pile a low, contented cry of "Kuja, kuja, kuja," followed by a curious addition sounding like "fuff, fuff, fuff." So I put them all together and named the strange new icy domain of King Gelidus Fuff Kuja. Sleep any more that night? Not a wink. The same joy came over me that I used to feel on Christmas morning long ago when Kris Kringle brought me some wonderful bit of mechanism moved by a secret spring. For I always scorned to accept ordinary toys like ordinary children. And oh, how I longed for the morning when it would be time for me to bundle up this little man, no longer him with the frozen smile, but Fukuja, the live boy from far away, with his curious little face screwed up in such a tiny look, and carry him to the palace. How delighted Sneebol would be, thought I, and King Gelidus too. How we will unbend from his frigid majesty as he watches the antics of Fukuja, and how pleased all the dignified Koltykwerps, including Frostofritz and Glacierboy, when I tell them that the little man with the frozen smile has come to life again. What crowds of Koltykwerps, men and women and children, will rush up long flights of steps leading to the ice palace, begging to be and entreating King Gelidus to let them have just a little look at Fukuja, the little man set free from his icy cell by the famous traveler, Baron Sebastian von Trump. So, let's continue because I'm curious. Chapter 27. It all turned out just as I thought it would. The moment it became known that the little man with the frozen smile had actually come to life, the wildest excitement prevailed in every part of the icy domain of his frigid majesty. I was astounded at the change in the actions of the Koltykwerps. They moved more quickly and talked faster. They made more gestures than I had ever seen them to before. In some cases, you will hardly believe it, dear friends, I actually noticed a faint glow in the cold cheeks of a few of them. I had hoped to be able to bundle Fukuja up warmly and make my escape to the ice palace before the people learned of his coming to life, but in vain. When I made my appearance at the door, there was a large crowd of Koltykwerps pushing and pulling in front of my quarters. Most of them were good-natured and cried out, "Show him to us, little baron. Show us the little man with the frozen smile whom thou hast brought to life. Let us look upon his face." "Nay, nay, Koltykwerps, it must not be. His frigid majesty must be the first to look upon Fukuja's face. Room, room for the noble guest of royal Gelidus. In the name of the frigid majesty, give way and let me pass. The Koltykwerp showed no inclination to obey. To such a pitch of excitement they had worked themselves up, that only upon seeing Bulger advance upon them with flashing eyes and teeth laid bare, did they reach the conclusion that my brave companion was in no mood to be trifled with. Thwarted in their wild desire to get a peep at Fufkuja, the Koltykwerps now began to rail me as I passed them. By on my way to the ice palace. Oh ho, master musician, ha ha, prince of the black art, boo boo, little wizard, have a care, wily necromancer. See to it that thou dost practice any of thy tricks of enchantment upon us. I was glad when the axe-bearer saw my plight and hurried forward to extricate me from the crowd of angry people. King Gelidus met me at the portal of his ice palace, and at his heels came Princess Nebel, who could hardly wait for her turn to take a look at the curious living creature which I unwrapped just enough to let her see its nose. The instant Fufkusha set eyes upon the sweet face of the Koltykwerp princess, he stretched out his little arm as a child might to its mother. This sudden show of affection caused Nebel the liveliest pleasure, and quickly drawing off one of her gloves, she reached out and stroked the animal's head. But at the touch of those, to him, icy fingers, he uttered a low wail and drew back underneath the warm pelt in which was snugly wrapped. Poor Schneebel! She gave a sigh as she saw him do this, but it didn't prevent her from coming every minute or so, lifting one end of the pelt, just enough to take another look at Fufkusha, who, while he never failed to cuddle up closer to me at the sight of the princess, yet invariably thrust out one of his black paws from under her pelt for Schneebel to shake. While seated in the divan nearest the throne, I observed that Frosted and Glacier Boy were holding a whispered conference with his frigid majesty. At once I guessed the subject of their conversation. Rising to my feet, I made a sign that I wished to address the king, and when he had nodded his head with stern and icy dignity, I began to speak. You know, dear friends, how eloquent I can be when the mood is upon me. Standing there almost upon the steps of King Gelidus' throne of ice, I proclaimed to defend myself against the charge of being a master of the black art. I will not tell you all I said, but this was my ending. May it please your majesty, here beside me stands the only magician in the case, and the only trick to charm which exercised him was the sweet power we call love. When first he set eyes upon his four-footed brother, locked in the crystal cell of Schneebel's grotto, he pressed his nose again and again against this icy wall in a vain attempt to show his kinsman that turned away with icy sorrow to find his keen scent could not penetrate him. I cannot tell you how great it was with joy when I laid Fufkusha stiff and stark upon my divan, for I knew not the scheme ripening in Bulger's mind. But later all was plain enough. The loving dog leaves his master's breast and carries his true and tender heart over to where Fufkusha lies, raises the pelt, crawls in beside him, and presses his warm breast firm and hard against his brother's ice-locked heart, and warms him to life again. Then wakes me and tells me what he hath done. Thus, royal Gelidus and most noble Koltykwerps, is the only art that hath been used to bring Fufkusha back to life again, and to call it back is to slander the sunshine, rail at the lily, and call the sweet breath of heaven a vile and detestable thing. When I had ended my speech, I saw that Schneebel had been weeping, and that several of her tears stopped in their course down her cheeks, hung there sparkling like tiny diamonds in the soft light of the alabaster lamps, where the chill air of Gelidus' palace had turned them to ice. And therefore, when his frigid majesty said that my words had touched his heart, and bade me ask for a gift from his hand, I said, O cold king of this fair icy domain, let those tears that now hang like tiny jewels on Schneebel's cheeks be brushed to an alabaster box and given to me. I covet no other guerdon. Even if I dost not love thee, little baron, cried King Gelidus with an icy smile, I would be persuaded. But loving makes easy believing. Go, Froster, and bid one of the princess's omens brush those tiny jewels that hang upon Schneebel's cheek into an alabaster cup, and bestow them upon the little baron. Scarcely had this been done when Fufkusha thrust his head out from under the pelt, and fixing his eyes pleadingly upon me, thrust out his tongue and opened and shut his mouth with a faint smacking noise. Quick as a flash, it dawned upon me that this signs meant Fufkusha was hungry. And then I suddenly remembered that the Koltykwerps were strictly a meat-eating people. The only meat was to be had in their chill domain, quarried like most marble itself from nature's great refrigerators. A gasp escaped my lips, and I whispered, Oh, he must die, My words had not missed my keen ears of Prince Schneebel. "Speak, little baron," she said. Why must the little Fufkujo die? Why just means such saying?" And when King Gelidus and Schneebel had heard my voice, in fear that he would die rather than feed on meat, they both became very heavy-hearted. "Poor little Fufkoja," moaned the princess. "Can it be possible that he must be carried back so soon to his crystal cell in my grotto?" "Bid the master of my meat quarries approach thy throne," King Gelidus suddenly said, a voice of icy dignity. The important functionary soon made his appearance. Turning to me, the king bade me explain the case to him. This I did in a few words, when, to the great joy of all present, the master of meat quarries spoke as follows. "Little baron, if that's the only trouble, give thyself no further uneasiness, for I shall at once send one of my men to thee with a supply of most delicious nuts." "Delicious nuts," I repeated in a tone of amazement. "Why, yes, little baron, I have a goodly supply on hand. Know, then, that hardly a day goes by that my men don't come upon a fine specimen of the family of gnars, most generally squirrels, in whose cheek pouches we invariably find from one half a frozen dainty nut stowed away. It has always been my custom to lay these aside, and so I have to inform thee that if Fufkuja should live to be 100 years old, or my successor could guarantee a keep of him supplied food." Those words lifted a terrible load off of my heart, for now at least Fufkuja would not die of starvation. For a few days everything went well. The Koltykwerps became quite satisfied in their own minds that I had not been practicing the black art in the chilly kingdom of his frigid majesty, and each and every one of them became greatly attached to the curious little creature with the droll little face and droller manner. But it seems as if we were no sooner out of one trouble than we plumped into another, for now Fufkuja began to object to the attendants selected to look after him by King Gelidus. The man was about 10 degrees too cold-blooded for him, and ere long it was only necessary for the Koltykwerp to approach Fuff, as we called him for short, in order to throw him into convulsions with shivering, and cause him to utter pitiable cries of discontent, which only ceased upon my appearing and comforting him by my caresses. I now set to work to devise some way to make Fuff's life more agreeable to him, for everybody seemed to hold me responsible for his well-being. 10 times a day came messengers from King Gelidus and from Princess Schneebel to ask how he was getting on, and whether we were keeping him warm enough, whether we had all wanted to eat, whether he had pelts on his bed, nor would his unusual thing to have a score more Koltykwerpian mothers called by my quarters during a single day with advice enough to last a month. And therefore was it that, with a view of providing him with a warmer room to sleep in, I ordered a divan fitted for him in a smaller chamber opening onto mine, upon the walls which I directed 6 of the largest lamps to be hung. The consequence was that the walls began to melt, hearing of which consternation spread throughout the icy domain of his frigid majesty, for to the mind of a Koltykwerp, heat powerful enough to melt ice was something terrible. It was like the dread of earthquake shock to us, or the fear of flood or flame. It was something that lifted their hearts with such terror in their dreams they saw the solid walls of Ice Palace melt asunder and fall with a crash. They could not bear it, and so King Gelidus put forth the decree that if there were no other way to keep Fufkuja alive, then he must die. Hearing this, an awful grief came upon poor Schneebel's heart, for she had learned to love little Fluff very dearly, and set a knife to her breast to think of losing him. "Never, never," she cried, "shall I be able to set foot within my grotto if Fufkuja is put back into his crystal prison again, with his frozen smile on his face as it once used to be, and seeking out her royal father, she threw herself at his knees and spoke as follows. O heart of ice, O frigid majesty, let not thy child die of grief. There is an easy way out of all our troubles with dear little Fufkuja." "Speak, beloved Schneebel," answered King Gelidus. "Let me hear what it is." "Why, cold heart," said the princess, "the little baron hath plenty of warmth stored away in his body, and hath enough for both himself and Fufkuja into the bargain. Therefore, frigid father, command that a deep warm hood be made for little baron's coat, and that Fufkuja could be placed therein to be borne about by the little baron wherever he goeth. He will soon grow accustomed to the slender burden of it, and note of it no more." "It shall be as thou wishest," replied the king of the Koltykwerps, and calling his trusty counselor Glacierbor, directed him to summon me at once to the throne room. When I heard this terrible order issue from the icy lips of King Gelidus, my heart sank within me, yet I dared not disobey. I dared not murmur, for it was I who had cleft asunder the crystal prison of the little man with the frozen smile. I who had made it possible for Bulger to warm him back to life. Oh, poor, vain, weak, foolish boy that I had been. What was to become of me now? There you go. There's chapter 26 and 27. Just keeps getting more interesting, doesn't it? There's only 5 chapters left. So, until next time, if you missed any, check out, I made a special playlist for this book. It's called Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, and you'll find it. Until next time, keep reading.